Good evening. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar on combating discriminatory home appraisals. Before we begin, I'd like to review some Zoom tips for language access and webinar features. We have interpretation available in Spanish. To select the audio channel in English or Spanish, you can click on the small globe symbol at the bottom bar. We kindly ask that you change your name so we know who you are. You can click on participants, then more, and rename to do this. We ask that you please stay muted to prevent noise interference. If you run into any technical difficulties, please message me, Jesly Delacruz, the moderator, or Gina Andrade, our Director of Operations, for support. I will serve as today's moderator. We will save time at the end for today's Q&A. You can also add your questions to the chat as we go along for clarification on our panel discussion. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. The Latino Action Network Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit that is established as a charitable organization with the goal of uniting New Jersey's diverse Latino communities. We wanted to have this webinar for many reasons, including raising awareness of housing inequalities and how to address discriminatory home appraisals, educate the public, promote the industry, accountability, highlight impact on individuals and communities, and empower affected individuals, and together advocate for policy changes. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have 5 panelists for today's webinar. James C. William IV, who is the Director of Racial Justice at the Fair Share Housing Center. Charu Singh, CEO and founder of Just Value, Inc. Aaron Williams, Chief Advisor to the Director at the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights. Emilio Aviles, Agency Services Representative at the New Jersey State Real Estate Appraisers Board. And Karen Daber, Assistant Deputy Director at the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs. So thank you, everyone. I am going to start sharing our slides. Oh, and I think I was supposed to do that earlier, so my apologies. Let me just start the slideshow and share. Can you all see the slides? Maybe the panelists can let me know. Do you see the slides? No? Okay, let me stop. That's okay. You would think, right? After all this time, we would automatically know how to do this. So I'm gonna just make sure I scroll all the way up to the top. I did introduce everyone and give these instructions around that and basically around who we are and why we were having this webinar. And these slides will all be shared after the webinar in a follow-up email from us. So first, I'd like to introduce our first panelist speaker, who is James C. William IV. James, you have the floor.
So good evening. Thank you, Jesly. Thank you, Lan, and to my fellow panelists for being on this evening. I won't take too much of your time, but because I know the rest of the panelists are truly dynamic and have some very important things to say. So Fair Share Housing Center has worked in the civil rights and housing space for over 50 years, and our work has historically been around the historical constitutional mandate that exists within New Jersey, which is the Mount Laurel Doctrine, which is a very important part of how New Jersey has moved the needle to integrate and provide housing opportunities for all New Jerseyans, but particularly for people of color. So my insertion into this conversation today is often when you think about Fair Share Housing Center, we think about the affordable housing that is built for Mount Laurel. But housing as a continuum, right? So we're thinking about transitioning from rental into home ownership, and we'd be doing our communities and ourselves a great disservice if we didn't talk about what you should be afforded towards the other end of the spectrum, right? So we understand that we want to provide you with the opportunity to buy homes and to live in homes, but if you aren't getting the appropriate equity that comes with that home, we need to then have that conversation. So, in looking at some of the national data and thinking about this conversation, wanting to lay some context about how we exist in this space and what the racial wealth gap looks like here in the state of New Jersey, is critical to understanding why appraisal bias is uh, not only prevalent in New Jersey, but it's gotten traction on the national stage. So the Brookings Institute recently released a report that talked about what the average devaluation for Black homeowners nationally is looking like, and that number is roughly around $48,000. And that's the average. So I just want to set the baseline of what that looks like and how that can take away from homeowners. And Andre Perry, the author of the report, did a calculation, and it's the approximately we're talking about 156 billion cumulative loss for individuals, right, nationally. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of opportunity. That's a lot of wealth that's being deprived of these individuals. So when we think about what equity is wealth. And this may seem like a heavy-handed assertion, and I've used this example when talking to other advocates and even legislators, that if a person of color were to walk into someone's home and steal $50,000 worth of money or items, they would go to jail and they'll be charged as a felon. If an appraiser has the ability to deprive a person of color of $50,000 worth of equity, we should be looking to address it the exact same way, right? So this equity, this wealth that we're depriving is college, retirement, medical expenses. During COVID, it was funerals, right? So that wealth isn't just some pot of money that sits in perpetuity. That wealth is providing you with opportunities that not only extend to you but extends to the next generation. So that wealth is also inheritance, particularly for communities of color. That word is not innately taught to our communities. We don't know how to inherit because we never have. And when you buy a home and you have the opportunity to create wealth, to generate it for you and your family, we know that home ownership is one of the primary wealth developers for our communities. And when you deprive us of that equity, and particularly now that we're seeing more of the urban centers, particularly in New Jersey, start to create more and more development. We're seeing a tremendous amount of development in Jersey City. Newark is starting to thrive. I'm a resident of Camden and I'm seeing the transition happen in my own city. And I'm proud to say I'm a homeowner in my own city. So what does that look like for me? Do I have to whitewash my home? Do I have to take down all of my art, all of my family pictures? Do I have to rearrange what that looks like? So for me, I really wanted to lay the context about not only the loss for these communities, but also the possibilities of what we want to gain, not only in changing the field, but really understanding that this is criminal and this needs to be enforced at the highest level. So I'm really happy to see happy to hear from the other panelists and looking for what they have to say. And hopefully, my statements today will help to lay some context as to how we can start to change appraisal bias and really provide Black and Brown families with the equity that they so rightfully deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for laying the framework and also sharing any resources that we can support your efforts around this. Please let us know, and we'll also share that with everyone on today's webinar. So our next panelist speaker is Charu Singh of Just Value Inc. And I do have up your slides. Charu, so you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Charu Singh. I'm the CEO and founder of Just Value Inc. I want to say thank you for including me on this panel today on a topic that I agree with James is very, very important and deservingly is getting increasing attention throughout the US. I'm really pleased to see all the panelists that are on this webinar today, because we can start to understand how important this topic is to residents of New Jersey and organizations and agencies in New Jersey as well. I think James set the stage really perfectly, and I'll actually be able to skip some of the foundational work I was going to talk about. But one of the things I do want to talk about is how important Latino homeowners are today and moving into the future. Latino homeowners are one of the fastest growing and most important constituency today in the US. And I say that to help Latino homeowners understand how powerful your voice can be in this conversation around appraisal bias and closing the racial wealth gap through home ownership. So I'll just mention a couple things. The Brookings Institution in 2018 found that 22% of all cities they surveyed that were surveyed by the US Census were majority of color cities. Fannie Mae expects that there will be 4 million new Latino homeowners between 2020 and 2030. And today, well, as of 2021, there are 51% of Latino homeowners, of Latino households are homeowners. And actually, Latinos are the only group that Fannie Mae expects will grow their homeownership participation over the next 5 years. And so I say that because Latino homeowners are one of the growing and powerful voices within our housing industry and within New Jersey. And I want to encourage everyone to be able to use that voice. Could I have the next slide? Thank you. So we're talking today about appraisal bias. And I just wanted to make one distinction about appraisal bias. Something that you've read a lot about in the newspaper, perhaps, is subjective bias. When an appraiser might come into a home to evaluate the home and provide an opinion of value. And we've read stories about the value being less, sometimes $60,000, in other cases $200,000 or even $500,000 lower, due to the race of the homeowner. This is what we call subjective bias, and we're starting to see lawsuits that homeowners are raising in order to be able to get the correct value for their home. I think today we'll learn about other options that a homeowner has beyond a lawsuit. There's actually more and more resources becoming available, processes becoming available to homeowners to be able to question the value that they've received for their home. And then the other kind of bias, which is what I work on, and actually something that James was referring to, is subjective bias. So that's actually this part of the map here, where I don't think I can indicate on the slide, but where you see the lots of little homes. When a whole neighborhood has a lower value related to the race of that neighborhood, that's what we can call subjective bias. And there's lots of reasons that a community of color can have lower value. We know that sometimes the schools aren't as good as in majority white neighborhoods. maybe transit is not as good or as frequent. Maybe the quality or the upkeep or the maintenance of the home is not as high due to income. However, in addition to these reasons that could influence lower values, we're also finding through research that race can be a contributor to reducing that value. And that's the work James was just referring to by the Brookings Institution and Andre Perry. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We can move to the next slide. One more back, or yes, this one. So through that research, I quote the Brookings Institution here. What we're talking about is the average national undervaluation of homes by race. So these figures don't refer to maybe your home in your community, because actually whether your home is undervalued or by how much your home is undervalued depends by neighborhood and by city. But researchers have been able to do analysis so that we can understand on average across the US how undervalued might communities of color be. And this may have some similarity to your own community. So as James mentioned, the Brookings Institution and Andre Perry did do this analysis, and they found on average in majority Black neighborhoods where Black residents are more than 50% of the neighborhood of owners and residents, homes were on average undervalued by $48,000 or up to 23% lower. And what's incredible is when you add it all up, it can result in $156 billion in losses. So $50,000 is already a lot of money. That's actually almost the average annual income of a US worker. But when we think about the cumulative losses, the total losses to our nation, that's $156 billion that households are not putting towards education or healthcare or starting businesses or upgrading their homes. I was also able to find some early research on the impact on Latino houses. And again, these are figures that are average across the US. So that means it includes Los Angeles and New York, but also Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Canton, Ohio. So it's a really big range across the country, but they did find that on average, Latino homes are valued at 2.5 times less than white, the same type of white home in across the nation. So that means that there can be a really big disparity between the wealth in your home and the wealth in a white homeowner's home. And that's really what James is referring to, that wealth is wealth that you're not able to recognize and access and use to pass on wealth from one generation to the next. We can go to the next. So there's actually been a lot of studies in this area. What started out as maybe just an idea or some thinking by an academic is now being taken on by advocacy groups like NAFA. The federal government created a whole plan around appraisal bias that not only mentions systemic bias, but identifies lots of solutions for subjective bias also, including options for homeowners when they feel that they have not been treated justly. And even the mortgage industry, appraisers themselves and lenders like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae have all been looking at this problem of subjective and systemic appraisal bias. And it's all this work that we see here on the screen, these reports that are motivating organizations like today and local governments to really look closely at this problem. So I just want to talk a little bit about my company, Just Value. What we are doing is developing an alternate way to value homes, which we call a restorative valuation model. And this approach to understanding home value takes into account the almost century-long practices that have suppressed value in communities of color. Many will be familiar with redlining, which denied loans to people of color located in certain neighborhoods. But there was lots of other policies that occurred that served to reduce the value of homes. And that legacy lives on today in the way that we value homes. And then the second part of our work is to create a restorative mortgage, like a second mortgage that allows homeowners to access this additional value in their homes. So say $48,000, as the Brookings Institution found, to be able to reinvest that in their homes. We are a company that's just getting started. We have pilots here, in Boston and New Orleans. And we can go to the next slide. And I would love to have a pilot here in New Jersey. So if you feel that you live in a neighborhood that you think is systemically undervalued, or you think the whole neighborhood would actually be valued higher if there were more white residents there, please get in touch with me. I'd love to find a case here in New Jersey that I could work with local groups and residents to understand if there is undervaluation, and if so, what we can do to resolve that through creating a financial product.
Thank you. Thank you, Chado. Please share that information with everyone in the chat, or you can send it to me or Gina. We can share it with everyone in the chat. Thank you. So our next panelist I'd like to introduce is Aaron Williams, Chief Advisor to the Director at the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to everyone here, to my colleagues and fellow panelists, as well as Lana, for putting together this really important, really timely, critical conversation about home appraisal discrimination or bias. So I'm going to start. You already introduced me, but I need to provide my pronouns, which are she, her, and hers. And you already provided my title, so I'll jump right in. I want to begin with briefly echoing some of the points my colleagues have already highlighted, that this is an industry issue, home appraisal bias and discrimination, not merely an appraiser issue. This is a people issue that is directly connected to how we view and value people. Appraisals represent value in the market of a home and very often a neighborhood, all populated by people. And to that point, all value is socially constructed, which means that people determine how much something is valued and how that home or neighborhood, or frankly, even those people, will be prioritized. This may not be an actuality about the value of people in homes and neighborhoods, but it is unfortunately a current reality. And as you've heard many of us already reference housing equity scholar Andre Perry, I will also do the same and mention that how he discusses in his various scholarships focused on the undervaluation of Black neighborhoods. But this is not a lot of data taken into account to come up with an appraisal. There is not, unless I stand corrected by my colleagues at the Board of Appraisals, some deep mathematical calculus. There are various methods to determine a property appraisal value, and it is often based upon a few people who are, because of their demographics in the industry, almost exclusively white and male, which is why when a home is undervalued or even frankly overvalued, it can be hurtful to some. It can be damaging to a neighborhood and communities, and even the communities around it, and schools and businesses, and importantly, the homeowners, people who are often working to acquire equity, wealth, and resources, and are often left feeling helpless. And so I know that one of the goals in this webinar is to arm people with information on how to report bias and discrimination in home appraisals, and that's what I will discuss. If you could advance the next screen, Sophia or Jessica.
That works.
Thank you. So I always like to start with laying the ground about who DCR is, what DCR does. And DCR, again, is the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights. So the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights is the state agency charged with enforcing New Jersey's civil rights laws, including the ever important New Jersey Law Against Discrimination, which you will hear me refer to as the LAD, the New Jersey Family Leave Act, which I will refer to, well, I won't actually in this one because we're talking about housing, but what is referred to as the NJFLA, and the Fair Chance in Housing Act, referred to as the FCHA. And the mission of DCR is to protect the people of New Jersey from discrimination and bias-based harassment in employment, housing, and public accommodations. And the LAD is one of the oldest and most comprehensive anti-discrimination laws in the country. It prohibits discrimination and harassment based on actual or perceived race, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity expression, disability, and many, many other protected characteristics. The law, again, applies in employment, housing, and places open to the public, such as businesses, restaurants, schools, summer camps, government offices, and more. And DCR has several bureaus and units that work to prevent, eliminate, and remedy individual and systemic discrimination and bias-based harassment. And we do that in two ways that I'll briefly explain, which are our reactive work, where we're mandated to take complaints from individuals like public who are alleging discrimination and harassment, investigate it to determine if there is indeed a violation of any of the laws that we enforce, and determine if we are able to remediate violations. And then we also have the proactive work, which instead of reacting to an individual complaint, we work to prevent discrimination and address more systemic issues that can't necessarily be addressed by individual complaints. And we achieve that through various units as well. You could advance to the next screen. Thank you. So I want to just also tell you a little bit about the priorities of the division and frankly the federal government as well. So in 2021, the Biden administration launched an interagency task force led by HUD, which is the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to launch a property appraisal and valuation equity initiative known as PAV, with the goal of exploring the issue of discrimination and inequities in home appraisals. And then here in our very own state, since taking office in 2022, the New Jersey Attorney General Matthew Placken has also prioritized achieving fair housing around our state. And DCR, having existed for well over 75 years, has been working for decades to address bias and discrimination in housing through both our affirmative and responsive work that I described a moment ago. And so some of that work includes a historic community settlement against Trident Mortgage for the race-based redlining practices in the Trenton area, working with home buying and rental platforms like Zillow Inc. to address source of lawful income discrimination, and promulgating the nation's first of its kind Fair Chance in Housing Act, which significantly limits how housing providers can consider a potential tenant's criminal history during the tenant application process. And now, outside of all of that work that we're continuing to do, the New Jersey Attorney General and Division on Civil Rights is prioritizing addressing home appraisal discrimination around our state. You can move to the next slide. And so I want to explain how the law, that's one of the nation's oldest, covers this area. So to understand how DCR will combat this type of discrimination, I will begin with this, the LAD, our state's premier anti-discrimination law. And it also mentioned that the LAD is broader than federal anti-discrimination law and many other states in our area, as it protects more protected categories and classes of people. And I will highlight that briefly, while we know, based upon all the studies that Charu mentioned and the policies and information that James gave us, that largely studies have been focused on race-based discrimination, and that is certainly a priority to DCR, frankly, even to myself personally. Again, under the LAD, we cover several over 27 categories of protected classes where people may experience discrimination, including in home appraisals. So the New Jersey law against discrimination prohibits this, and prohibits bias and discrimination in housing. And the LAD makes it unlawful for any person to discriminate in the terms, conditions, or privileges of the sale, rental, lease, assignment, or sublease of any real property based on any protected characteristic, including race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, disability, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity or expression. And that prohibition extends beyond property owners to any person involved in the furnishing of any facilities or services in a transaction, including home appraisals. And the LAD.
Aaron, can I just ask that maybe you slow down a little bit because the translation takes a little bit longer.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, thank you.
Let me see if I'm catching up. So if I see Sophia still talking, all right.
Thank you.
No problem. See, and I'm Southern, and even still, I talk fast.
It's okay.
Okay. Looks like Sophia's caught up. And I'm going to slow down.
Thank
So the LAD also separately prohibits any person, any bank, banking organization, mortgage company, insurance company, or other financial institution, lender, or credit institution involved in the making or purchasing of any loan or extension of credit, or any agent or employee thereof, from discriminating against any person or group of persons. And lastly, the LAD also makes it unlawful for any person to interfere with any person in the exercise or enjoyment of any right granted or protected by the LAD, and a discriminatory housing appraisal can interfere with an individual's housing rights in violation of this provision. And I don't usually like to provide all of these words and quotes and legal statutes, but I think it's important to do that sometimes because often people don't fully realize that the law, especially here in our state, protects them. So if you're on your phone, you might want to take a screenshot, lawyer or not, advocate or not, so you can know that the law clearly protects you in this state. And at minimum, those 4 different bullet points. So taken all together, all of these provisions bar discrimination in home appraisals conducted during the home buying or lending process. It's clear. And so I share these direct quotes so that you are familiar with how expansive the LAD is in protecting you, as it's critical to know that this is specifically delineated in our state laws. And it is important to DCR that all housing providers, homeowners, home purchasers, and those in the real estate and appraisal industry are also aware that discrimination is absolutely prohibited in our state, and we take allegations very seriously. Thank you. If you can move to the next slide. And so to understand how DCR will combat this type of discrimination under the LAD, I'm going to, I'm sorry, because I was on the wrong slide, pardon me. Because the LAD prohibits discrimination by any person who is involved in the furnishing of facilities or services or involved in the making or purchasing of any loan, the LAD imposes obligations on a number of key entities involved in conducting, soliciting, or using a home appraisal during the home buying or lending process. And that includes, at a minimum, what you see on your screen right now, which are appraisers themselves, appraisal management companies, which are often referred to as AMCs, and mortgage lenders. Those are the ones in the pipeline of the appraisal and valuation process. And again, the LAD prohibits discrimination by all of these entities, including home appraisers, who, if you don't know, are the industry professionals responsible for conducting an appraisal. And the LAD's broad language also prohibits discrimination, not just by the appraisers who conduct the appraisal, but also by other entities involved in selecting an appraiser, the AMCs, and using the appraisal to decide whether and on what terms to extend a mortgage, the mortgage lenders. And so these entities include lenders such as banks and non-bank mortgage lenders and appraisal management companies, which connect the lenders with the appraisers, and they may manage the appraisal process during the real estate transaction. And this is really important to know because all or some of these entities may be complicit or frankly advancing discrimination, and you can report all or some of them for that potential discrimination. So often the discussion about discrimination in home appraisals is often largely focused on the appraisers themselves, the ones who were coming out to the properties. And often, important, and I agree with this, is about diversifying the industry and frankly, punishing individual appraisers for any type of bias, intentional or unintentional. And while DCR does support these contentions and plans to address those concerns, like many other industries, to truly eradicate discrimination and bias, we must enforce our laws to ensure that the systems that perpetuate the bias and those involved in the systems are also addressed. And that may require looking at all parties involved in the transaction. And again, I point this out not only for the benefit of homeowners and purchasers, but all parties within the field, the appraisers, the appraisal management companies, mortgage lenders, and those in the real estate industry. Thank you. Could you next slide? And so it is critical to report allegations of bias and discrimination to the proper authorities. And that includes DCR, as well as New Jersey Home Appraisal Board, whom we will hear from shortly. And we are neutral bodies that, when appropriate, will investigate these claims. This might be another screen that another slide that you may wish to take a screenshot of, where I provide you with the ability to report any type of bias or discrimination in home appraisals. So if you believe that you or others have experienced discrimination in connection with a home appraisal in our state, please email us. I check it personally. Please email us at appraisals, APPRAISALS, at njcivilrights.gov. That's NJCIVILRIGHTS.gov. And when you contact us, please provide your full name, your best contact information, and a summary of the basis of the claim and why you believe you may have been discriminated against. And for those who may understandably be concerned about possible retaliation from a mortgage lender or an appraiser or anyone else in the industry, please know that also that the LAD prohibits retaliation. It is illegal, whether by a home appraiser, a lender, AMC, a realtor, or anyone else, and it's against the law to do so. Next slide, please. And I also think it's important for people to know that by reporting these issues to DCR does not just go into a pipeline. Like, DCR works to provide the community of people, when we find that there is actual discrimination, work to provide you with various potential relief. We're not just a group that you just report to and just, that nothing may ever happen. We hope to possibly, if discrimination is found, to provide you with various ranges of relief and remedies. And I want to go over those briefly. Because again, I know when we're talking about home appraisals, we're talking about someone's home and community, the schools, and how that's attached to a person's home, that often we're talking about trying to build wealth and trying to build equity and trying to build long-term financial wealth for our families. So, understanding that there's a range of things, including monetary damages, restitution, or specific performance that can occur. So some examples of remedies that DCR may, if discrimination is found, that you may be able to gain from includes affirmative changes, which is if someone is discriminated against due to, for example, their gender identity, DCR could require, again, for example, a healthcare facility to treat them. That's an affirmative change. We could also require new policies. Using the same example, we may require policy to use a patient's chosen name and pronouns on medical documents if you file with us and find discrimination name. We can also require training on the LAD or any of the other laws that we enforce, and that can include implicit bias trainings or other topics relevant to the issue, and that can include in your mandatory implicit and explicit bias trainings and housing for all company personnel if we find that there may have been possibly discrimination in a home appraisal. We can also monitor respondents or the target's conduct to ensure it has improved their routine meetings or correspondences or reports for their treatment of employees. We can require a respondent to report on their actions to us for years at a time. So, for example, requiring a facility to provide us with notice of any negative comments that they have received or any poor feedback of surveys that they received related to race-based discrimination and how they responded to it. We can also order monetary damages to victims. Our statutory range penalties range from $10,000 for one violation up to $50,000 for a third violation or more. And we can also provide or work to provide equitable remedies like required participation in a task force, creating a fund for victims to receive compensation, and much more. Or frankly, even as a real life example, using an actual example, we've been able to require Fortune 500 companies to institute large scholarship funds to increase opportunities for employment and accounting and finance fields for women and other populations who are underrepresented in the industry. So again, I want people to know that reporting to DCR, if we find discrimination or believe that there is discrimination, we can work to help you gain some of those possibilities. And last slide. So in closing, I wanted to remind you that you can report to DCR through, well, related to appraisal discrimination only by email at appraisals@njcivilrights.gov. But importantly, if you experience or believe that you or others are experiencing discrimination in employment, housing, or places open to the public, you can visit DCR's website and then you can go to file a complaint. And you can file a complaint on our website and we'll walk you through various steps so that you can do that. You can also come in person at one of our various 5 state offices, and you can call us at 1-833-NJDCR for you. And there's a 711 relay. And you can also email us at NJDCR4, just the letter U, at njcivilrights.gov. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron, for all that information. And again, we will be sharing these slides in an email after this webinar is over, and this recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Our next panelist speaker that I'd like to introduce, I just want to make sure I had to give up stop the slides for a second, is Emilio Aviles, Agency Services Representative at the New Jersey State Real Estate Appraisers Board. So Emilio, you have the floor. I'll bring up your slides now.
Good evening, everyone. How can I follow Aaron? That was very informative, Aaron. Very well done. My name is Emilio Aviles. I've been working with the Real Estate Appraisal Board for 25 years now, more or less. And, you know, as we all know, this topic has picked up a lot of steam recently, although it always has been an issue, but I'm glad that it's actually picking up and we are doing things about it, and we are collaborating with a number of different agencies to, you know, to combat this, including within the agencies, obviously the DCR. As far as the board, though, we are under the umbrella of the Division of Consumer Affairs. So it kind of, we have 2 hats that we wear. Obviously, we're here for the appraisers. We license them. We give them, they show us the qualifications and we license them. But again, as we are under the Division of Consumer Affairs, we also here to protect the public. So it can get, you know, a little difficult sometimes, which is why the board consists of the way it is consisted. It's a statutorily, we are a 13 board member board, which consists of obviously professional appraisers who review all the complaints. We have government members and we have public members, you know, which is very diverse because it helps within the discussion when reviewing these complaints. You know, as Aaron and Sherry was stating, you know, there are outlets out there that don't require expensive lawsuits and everything like that, which again, it's with us as well as the DCR with us. We are here to review any complaint. It could be a minimal complaint of anything that the homeowner feels is wrong with the report, of course, including discrimination. It's free of charge. The complaint forms are on our website. I personally speak to everyone throughout the complaint process. Every complaint, I'm the one that contacts them. So we are very open to the public. You know, it's not anything where, you know, you're going to get a recording or anything like that. Again, as you can see, the complaint form is on our website. Normally, you give me a call, I can forward you everything and then guide you through the process of how to resolve any complaints. Just a little bit about the complaint process. You know, obviously we get this appraisal, this complaint form from the appraisers, from the public, along with any documentation that they have that can assist the board in its investigation. It's a little difficult with the board, whereas, and I'm not trying to say it, the board is not here to determine a value, because an appraisal is an opinion, a professional opinion of value, because they have went through all the schooling and experience to get that license certification. So what the board does is we receive the complaint. I then ask the respondent, the appraiser, to submit to me a copy of you know, his response to the complaint. They are awarded the opportunity to see the complaint, along with a copy of their appraisal and their work file, which is the most important part of it, because then that is when it's forwarded to the board members, who are the professional appraisers, to review everything that's within their work file, to see what comps they were using for the appraiser to derive at the value that they derived at. A lot of it is based on you know, community and similar homes. So board can see if an appraisal was manipulated, you know, not using a comparable that's similar to that home within down the block, and they went outside the area. There are so many red flags that the board is very educated on. We take courses, you know, on their spare time, on how to investigate complaints. It's not an easy process, you know. It takes a lot to do in it, but these board members are very aware of everything that's going on, and they take this very seriously. And I'm just glad that it's actually coming about more. And trust me, I've been receiving a handful of complaints that it's not just about they're unhappy with the value, but of course with discrimination. So it's ongoing. We're all learning at this point, and we're all just trying to collaborate to try to get to a reasonable solution to this. Again, this board, we are on the Consumer Affairs, but we are federally mandated, and we are under federally associations considered a appraisal qualifications board, which they outline all the criteria for an appraiser to get a license, and that's national. This board is audited. We are unlike any other board in the consumer affairs, such as accountancy, medical, as we are audited every 2 years. So these members from the appraisal qualifications board do come to my office, and they review all our files to see if we are in we're okay with everything. They search our regs, the complaints, our applications, and if we fail this, there can be action taken against this board. So it's not only like other boards that, you know, they just conduct their business and you have this to get your license. We have a federal mandate that we must adhere to, and it is very serious with them. lot of work compiling all this data for them, but we are very much on top of everything. And again, we just hope that we can get to a reasonable solution. Obviously, we won't get any type of resolution right away or probably ever, but to help at least. Again, our complaint forms are on the board website right there, as you can see. Right on the main page of the website is my personal information there. You can contact me directly with the board, and it can guide you through the whole process. It's no charge to the public at all. And unfortunately, our jurisdiction is basically only to the appraisal, where if we do find that there was something wrong with the appraisal, which might include discrimination, that you can use if you want to go any further. But again, our jurisdiction is to let you know that this appraisal was completed fraudulently for whichever reason it is. Other than that, if Karen has anything else to say from the Consumer Affairs Department, as we're under her, that's all I have.
Thank you, Amelia. Really appreciate you sharing this information and the forms, and we'll also share this link with everybody who registered for today's webinar. So thank you very much. I'd like to introduce, I know we are running short on time. We'll probably extend it to about 8:10 or 8:05 or 8:10. But I'd like to introduce Karen Day-Burr, who is the Assistant Deputy Director for the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs.
Good evening, everyone. Appreciate listening to all the panelists this evening. Emilio, you did a wonderful job discussing the complaint process. As I was introduced, I am an Assistant Deputy Director. There are two of us with the Division of Consumer Affairs, in which we oversee approximately 51 professional and occupational boards and committees under the Division of Consumer Affairs. What that means is, from a bird's eye view, we review the day-to-day operations, Real Estate Appraisal Board being one of those that are under my oversight. So, our hope is to continue, the collaborating with the Division of Civil Rights, to work on, our discussions with discriminatory practices in this field. So certainly, this is an important issue to the division, and we're going to work, certainly with other panelists, I would love to see some additional statistics. That was one of the most interesting highlights for me, was to see some of the information shared with the statistics, so that we can look at our metrics and take a look at what we're doing internally. So certainly we're looking forward to furthering those conversations with our partners. And certainly Emilio did provide the contact information if anyone feels that they've been discriminated against. For us, the proper channels would be to file that complaint and go through the complaint process with the Real Estate Appraisals Board. We're certainly, reviewing any of the complaints that come through, that allege those practices, and make sure that we're doing our part in reviewing, those complaints. So, my contact information, I will certainly share that in the chat if anyone would like to reach out to me directly as well. Or certainly you can forward that email to Emilio and he can forward that to me as well. But once again, I do appreciate the information that was shared tonight, and certainly look forward to furthering this conversation.
Thank you, Karen. And we're actually right on time at 7:54, and I don't see any Q&A right now in the chat or anywhere else. So I'm just gonna ask one question to see, and you can all weigh in your thoughts. So what are some common signs that an appraisal may be discriminatory? What are some red flags that homeowners or potential homeowners should be on the lookout for?
Well, what I would say from our perspective, certainly I don't think that we would have enough time in this space to really talk about what the board really assesses when it comes to that. But our website really shares a lot of information, on what is real estate appraisal, what the rules and regulations are for the profession itself, and what the board itself is charged with when reviewing those complaints. So what I would suggest, for anyone who really wants to understand, what it is that real estate appraisals should be doing, and those who feel that they have, some sort of violation against those rules and regulations that, protect the consumers from the practice, from malpractice in these areas, would really need to educate themselves, by reviewing the rules and regulations. We certainly try to parse out, a summary of that information on our homepage, to make that information a little bit easier to read for those, who don't have that legal mind. So, certainly the website would be the best place to do that, as well as the PDF that I believe Emilio has shared with everyone as well, provides a step-by-step, that also provides a breakdown for, certain categories, of what you feel as the consumer has happened to you. These are certainly not things that we try to make consumers feel like we can help you determine if you were discriminated against, but there are certain, categories within that form that could help you, determine if you feel, that there's a complaint, against a licensee of the board. So Emilio, I believe, has shared that contact information with several of our partners, and we'll make sure that that's available for the participants as well.
Thank you, Karen. Charu?
Thank you for those comments, Karen and Emilio. I think it's an incredible resource that's available to homeowners that in another time, people would not have been familiar with being able to raise these concerns to a board that could oversee investigating these complaints. I just want to help people think about how they can understand if there could be some undervaluation or bias reflected in their appraisal. The first thing that's often a clue is that your value has come in less than you thought. So that's often the first time that homeowners really start looking closely at their appraisal. But that doesn't have to be the only indication. One thing I would really encourage everyone to do is to read your appraisal. That it's a technical document, and lots of times people don't read it. And when you read it, you may not completely understand what it's saying right away. I think that's quite normal because most people may only receive 1, maybe 2 appraisals in their lifetime. And so that could be perhaps a future event LAMF may want to do, how to read your appraisal, what to look for. The other thing that I would look at are what are the comparables that are being used in that report. Often you know your community really well, and so you will know what are the homes that recently sold that you think are most similar to your home. And oftentimes there may be, in cases of bias, often it's found that the comparables are actually not comparable, that they may be too far when there was a better choice nearby. The home is really different. Maybe it's not as renovated a home, or it's smaller. There can be other options for comparables that the appraiser may have overlooked. So there's a few other sort of red flags that can be in the appraisal. I guess the last one I would mention, which I'm surprised frankly still happens, but I do hear about it, that people will use racial language within the narrative of the appraisal itself. And that's increasingly being understood by the industry that should not happen in the narrative. Surprisingly, it does still happen. And that's an easy way to identify that there could have been some influence on the appraiser by the race of the homeowner or the neighborhood. So these are a few of the kind of easiest red flags to find, but you will not find them if you don't read your appraisal.
Thank you.
Briefly,
Thank you,
I just want I concur with everyone here, particularly Charu, giving some specific examples. And I would also add that from DCR's observations of what's trending, that it is it's less likely, not unlikely, but definitely less likely that an appraiser may explicitly state that they're going to undervalue your home because you are Black, for example, but they may use a lot of coded language, which is why, to Charver's point, you really should read your appraisal, and to Karen's point, you should really understand, because it's a huge decision to either purchase or sell or what have you, refinance. You should be familiar with such a critical stage of the process and what is required. But, you know, there's a lot of language that can be very much coded language. So one example, like desirable neighborhood or schools, or undesirable neighborhood or schools, are language that suggest, heavily, I would say, suggest that the appraiser is operating and taking into account your home based upon their own biases about what is desirable to them or undesirable to them, because those are not things, and Emilio or Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, those are not in the standards that they're supposed to follow. They're clear-ish standards that appraisers are supposed to follow, and that is not one of them. So familiarize yourself with that. And if you are, which I know many people in New Jersey are owners of, or looking to purchase homes that are multifamily homes, it's also important to look at how they're evaluating your home and your potential rental income too. We've been told by many experts that it is very, very common for appraisers to undervalue the potential for rental income. So I live in North Jersey, and if there's a 2-family home, most rental income for, let's say, a 2-bedroom apartment in many places is not going for probably less than $1,500–1,600 a month. If the appraiser comes in and values your home, irrespective of comps, significantly less than that, that is also potentially a red flag. So really approach reviewing all of your documentation across all of your anything else with a fine-tooth comb, and question it if necessary, because you might be right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Those are great suggestions. And I think we will take you up on that suggestion of following up with some community education on how to read your home appraisal report, because I think that would be really a great resource for our community. So thank you so much. This is the end of our webinar. Thank you for staying a little bit of extra time. It's 8:03. As far as accessing this webinar, it will be up on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. Also, we'll be sharing all the resources and links that were shared today by our panelists in a follow-up email and a thank you email for all of those who registered and also were able to attend live today. So on behalf of the Latino Action Network Foundation, I'd like to thank all our expert panelists for making the time on this Thursday evening, right before St. Hallows Eve. You know, there's a lot of things we could be doing tonight in this beautiful fall weather. But I really appreciate you all taking the time to speak to the community so that we can address these racial wealth issues in our community. So thank you. And that's the end of our webinar for tonight. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much.